The morning fog over Brixham Harbor was a thick blanket that muffled every sound. For Liam, after 10 years navigating the chaotic ports of the North Sea on massive merchant vessels, that silence was strange. He had almost forgotten how quiet a small English coastal town could be at dawn. He stood on the wet stone quay, hands deep in the pockets of his worn jacket, staring at a boat he hadn't seen in a decade. The Albatross. His father's fishing trawler. It rocked gently against its mooring ropes, neglected and sad. Paint peeled from its hull like dry skin. The windows were grimy with salt and time. Liam had returned for one reason only, to handle his father's affairs. The old stone cottage by the dock was all Tom had left behind, and the bills meant decisions had to be made. But as Liam walked through the empty rooms the night before, filled only with dust and the smell of the sea that never quite left the walls, he felt something he hadn't expected. Guilt. He had been away too long. He had missed the signs that something was wrong. His father had vanished 18 months ago. Man overboard, the Coast Guard had ruled. They found the Albatross drifting near the mouth of the bay, engine running, a cold cup of tea still on the console. No struggle. No note. No body. Just open water and silence. The case was closed. A tragic accident. It happened to fishermen more often than people knew. Liam was in the middle of the Atlantic on a tanker when he got the news. He couldn't even come to the memorial service. He did what he had always done, he kept sailing. Kept moving. Kept the sea between himself and the grief. But now the sea had brought him back, and the grief was still there, waiting. The Albatross smelled like his father. Diesel, old rope, and the faint trace of tobacco from the pipe Tom used to smoke while checking his nets. Liam ran his hand over the wooden wheel, worn smooth by decades of his father's grip. For a moment, he could almost hear Tom's voice, complaining about the price of fuel or predicting the weather by the color of the sunset. He had come aboard to assess the boat's condition, but something made him look closer. He checked the engine compartment. Empty. The storage lockers. Empty. Then he noticed a section of the floor that didn't sit quite right. The wood was newer, the nails less rusted. His father was a meticulous man. He would never do sloppy repair work. Liam grabbed a crowbar from the toolbox and pried the boards loose. Beneath them was a hidden compartment. A space about the size of a large suitcase, carved into the hull where no compartment should exist. It was empty now, but the bottom was stained with a white residue. He touched it, rubbed his fingers together. It felt chemical. And the smell. A sharp, acrid scent that stung his nostrils. Not fish. Not fuel. Something else. He sat back on his heels, his mind racing. His father had built a secret space in his own boat. Why? What was he hiding? Or what had he found? Tom was an honest man. Everyone in Brixham knew that. He had lived in the same cottage for 40 years, fished the same waters, paid his taxes, and never caused anyone trouble. So why the secrecy? The discovery changed everything. The accident suddenly felt like a lie. Liam climbed out of the cabin and stood on the deck, looking out at the gray water of the harbor. Somewhere out there, in that endless expanse, his father had taken his last breath. And maybe, just maybe, he hadn't fallen. Maybe something else had happened. Liam needed answers, and there was only one person in town who might give them to him. Ilara lived on a converted houseboat moored in a quiet cove away from the main harbor. She was a marine biologist, studying pollution levels in the English Channel for a university research project, and she had always been kind to him when they were younger. She was also one of the few people his father had truly trusted. He found her on the deck of her floating home, sorting through water samples in labeled glass jars. She looked older now, her dark hair streaked with gray, but her eyes were still sharp and intelligent. When she saw Liam, she smiled warmly, but the smile faded quickly when he mentioned his father. "I'm so sorry about Tom," she said, setting down her equipment. "He was a good man. One of the best this town ever had. We all miss him." Liam nodded. "Everyone keeps saying it was an accident. But I found something on the boat, Ilara. A hidden compartment. With chemical residue inside. I need to know what it means." Ilara's face went pale. She looked around the cove, checking if anyone could hear them, then motioned for him to come inside. The cabin of the houseboat was cluttered with books, charts, and scientific equipment. She closed the door and turned to him, her expression serious. "Your father came to see me a few months before he disappeared," she said quietly. "He was worried. He said the fish were changing their migration patterns. Acting strange. He thought something was happening out in the deep water, beyond the shipping lanes. He asked me to check my data." Liam frowned. "What kind of something?" Ilara hesitated. "I've been tracking anomalies in water temperature and chemical composition for 2 years as part of my research. In certain areas, far from any legal shipping routes or industrial zones, the data spikes. Irregularly. Always at night. It looks like something is being dumped or transferred. Something that shouldn't be there." Liam spent the next 2 days listening. He went to the local pub, the Jolly Sailor, nursing a pint and keeping his ears open. The regulars talked about the usual things: football, the weather, who had caught what. But there were whispers about new people in town. Outsiders. They had bought the old boatyard at the edge of the harbor 6 months before Tom disappeared. Renovated it quickly. Paid in cash. Their leader was a man named Victor. Eastern European, they said. Polite but cold. Always wearing expensive coats and driving cars with license plates from London. He and his crew kept to themselves, but they were always looking for local men willing to do night work. Quick jobs. Good money. No questions asked. Liam asked a few careful questions. "What kind of work?" "Odd jobs," one fisherman said with a shrug. "Loading, unloading. They pay double the going rate, so nobody complains. They're renovating the boatyard, need extra hands." When Liam pressed for details about what they were loading, the man clammed up and went back to his beer. It was Ilara who gave him the coordinates. She had mapped every single anomaly she had detected over the past year. The points formed a pattern. A corridor running parallel to the official shipping lanes, but just far enough out to avoid radar and routine inspections. At the center of that corridor was a specific spot, marked by multiple spikes. A rendezvous point. "The transfers happen here," she said, pointing to the spot on her chart. "If I'm right, a larger vessel comes in from international waters. A mother ship. They meet smaller, faster boats that bring the cargo ashore. Somewhere along this coast. The chemical residue you found matches samples I've taken from these coordinates. Industrial solvents. The kind used in certain manufacturing processes." Liam studied the chart. The landing point would have to be discreet. hidden from view. He scanned the coastline, and his eyes stopped on a familiar name. Black Cliff Cove. A narrow inlet surrounded by high cliffs, inaccessible by road except for an old farming track. Perfect for a nighttime landing. His father had fished near that cove. And on the night he disappeared, the albatross had been found drifting not far from there. Liam borrowed a small motorboat from an old friend of his father's, claiming he wanted to do some fishing to clear his head. He set out just before dusk, navigating by the stars and the glow of the harbor lights behind him. The sea was calm, the sky clear. It felt wrong to be out here for this purpose, on water that had been his father's home. He cut the engine when he reached the coordinates Ilara had given him, letting the boat drift. The darkness was absolute. No other vessels in sight. Just the endless black of the water and the faint phosphorescence of plankton stirred by the current. He waited, feeling small and exposed. For an hour, nothing happened. Liam began to doubt himself. Maybe he was chasing ghosts. Maybe his father's death really was an accident, and the hidden compartment was for something innocent. Then he saw it. A light on the horizon. Then another. A large vessel, running without identification lights, was approaching slowly. It stopped about a mile from his position. Moments later, a smaller, faster boat roared to life from the direction of the coast. A rigid inflatable. It reached the larger vessel, and Liam could see shadows moving on deck, transferring cargo under the glow of dim work lights. His heart pounded. This was real. This was happening. He pulled out his phone, zoomed in with the camera, and started recording. The images were grainy in the darkness, but they were proof. Proof that something illegal was happening right here, in these waters, under the noses of everyone who lived along this coast. He watched until the transfer was complete, until the RIB sped back toward shore and the larger vessel turned and disappeared into the night. Then he started the engine and headed back, his mind racing with what to do next. He had evidence. Now he needed to understand what it meant. The black pickup truck was waiting when he reached the dirt road leading back to town. Liam saw its headlights in his rearview mirror, following at a distance but making no effort to hide. He sped up. The truck sped up. He slowed down. The truck matched his speed. His hands gripped the steering wheel. Think. He couldn't lead them back to Ilara. He couldn't lead them anywhere near her houseboat. He took a sudden turn onto a smaller road, cutting his lights and killing the engine behind a hedge. The truck roared past, its tires kicking up gravel, and disappeared into the night. It circled back twice, searching, before finally giving up. Liam sat in the darkness, breathing hard. They knew. They knew he had been out there. They didn't know what he had seen, but they knew he was asking questions. And if they knew that, they might also know about his father. The next morning, the news spread through town like wildfire. Old George, a fisherman who had been a friend of Tom's for 40 years, had been found dead. Drowned. His boat had capsized near the harbor entrance. The police said it was an accident. The water had been calm, but they said he must have slipped, hit his head on the way down. Tragic, but not unusual for a man his age working alone. Liam didn't believe it. George had been the one who first told him about the night jobs at the boatyard. George had seen something, or heard something, in the months after Tom died. And now George was dead, just days after Liam started asking questions. He went to Ilara's houseboat, his hands shaking with a mixture of fear and anger. They killed him, he said. They killed George because he talked to me.
Because he knew something. Ilara looked terrified. Liam, you need to go to the police.
This is too dangerous.
Which police? He snapped. The same ones who ruled my father's death an accident? The same ones who called George's drowning an accident? No. We need more. We need proof they can't ignore. Evidence that forces them to act.
The answer came from his father's things. Back at the cottage, Liam went through every box, every drawer, every scrap of paper Tom had left behind. Bills.
Fishing logs. Photographs of Liam as a boy, holding up his first catch.
And then, tucked inside an old nautical almanac that had belonged to his grandfather, a small notebook.
His father's handwriting. The last entries were dated just days before he disappeared.
Liam read by the weak light of a desk lamp, his heart heavy with each word. The notes were cryptic at first.
Coordinates. Times. Observations about weather and currents.
But then he saw it, a pattern. His father had been watching the same thing Liam had just witnessed.
The transfers. The mother's ship.
The corridor of illegal activity.
And at the back of the notebook, a crude but detailed map. Tom had connected the dots, just as Ilara had.
But he had gone further.
He had identified the landing point.
Not the open water rendezvous, but the actual spot on the coast where the small boats came ashore.
Black Cliff Cove. And he had written a name next to it in shaky capital letters, Victor.
Tom had figured it out. He had known who was behind the operation. And he had gone to the cove.
Alone.
On the night he disappeared.
The notebook contained one final entry, dated that same day, going to sea for myself. If something happens to me, look here. Tell Liam I love him. Tell him to be careful.
Liam closed the notebook, his eyes burning with tears he hadn't shed in years.
His father hadn't fallen overboard. He had walked into a trap.
He had been murdered because he knew too much and refused to look the other way.
And now, so did Liam. Ilara studied the notebook with the same intensity she gave her scientific data.
This changes everything, she whispered.
Your father knew the exact landing pattern. Look here.
He noted the tide times, the moon phases.
He knew when they would come. He was trying to document everything before going to the authorities. Liam leaned over the chart spread across her table. If the pattern holds, the next transfer is in 2 nights. The tide will be high just after midnight. Perfect for a landing at the cove. The same conditions as when my father went.
We have to be there, Ilara said firmly.
We have to document it. Get faces. License plates. Everything.
Then we go straight to the National Crime Agency.
Not local police. The real authorities. It's dangerous. If they catch us. Your father didn't back down, she interrupted. He went alone because he didn't want to put anyone else at risk. But we're not alone. We have each other. And we have the truth on our side. They planned carefully. Ilara had a high-resolution camera with a powerful zoom lens, equipment she used for her research. She also had night vision capabilities that would capture clear images even in darkness. Liam would handle the boat, bringing them close enough to see but staying hidden among the rocks at the edge of the cove. They would record everything, then take the evidence directly to Plymouth. No local involvement. No chance for anyone to warn the criminals.
The night of the transfer was perfect for crime.
The sea was calm as glass. No moon.
The kind of darkness that swallowed light and sound. Liam guided the small boat into the shadow of the cliffs, cutting the engine and letting them drift toward the cove. They waited in silence.
Minutes felt like hours.
Then they heard it. The low growl of an outboard motor. A rib appeared, cutting through the darkness toward the narrow beach. Men jumped out, began unloading black plastic-wrapped packages. A van waited on a makeshift track above the beach, its lights off.
Ilara's camera clicked quietly, capturing image after image.
A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across the rocks where they were hidden. Liam grabbed Ilara's arm, pulling her down behind a large boulder. The beam passed over them, then returned.
Stopped.
A voice shouted in a language Liam didn't recognize, then in English, "Someone's up there."
By the rocks. Liam didn't wait.
He pulled Ilara to her feet and they ran for the boat, stumbling over the uneven ground. Behind them, they heard shouts, the roar of the RIB starting up, boots pounding on the beach. They had been spotted. The chase was desperate.
Liam started the engine, gunning it away from the rocks.
The RIB was faster, more maneuverable, but Liam knew these waters.
He weaved between rocks, cut through shallow channels where the larger boat couldn't follow.
Ilara clung to the side, her camera pressed against her chest. Then they heard it.
A sound no sailor ever wants to hear. The crack of a gunshot. Then another.
Bullets whizzed past, pinging off the water around them.
Ilara screamed, ducking low. Liam pushed the engine to its limit, praying it wouldn't fail.
They reached open water, and the RIB was gaining.
Then, suddenly, it stopped. Liam looked back.
The RIB was turning around, retreating toward the cove.
Why would they give up? He realized a second later. They didn't need to catch them. They knew who they were.
They knew where they lived. They had seen Liam's face in the flashlight beam.
Liam didn't go back to the harbor.
He headed straight for the main road,
driving through the night toward Plymouth.
Ilara sat beside him, clutching her camera like a lifeline.
Neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say. They had the evidence.
But they had also just made themselves targets.
The National Crime Agency office in Plymouth was a modern building in a business park, surrounded by identical glass and steel structures. Liam walked in at 7 a.m., exhausted and terrified, and asked to speak to someone about a major crime.
The receptionist looked at him skeptically until he mentioned international smuggling, illegal transfers at sea, and a possible murder. Then she made a phone call. 2 hours later, Liam and Ilara sat in an interview room with a woman named Detective Inspector Sarah Chen. She was sharp, professional, in her early 40s, with the calm, focused demeanor of someone who had seen everything. She listened without interrupting as they told the whole story.
Tom's disappearance.
The hidden compartment. The chemical residue. Victor and the boatyard. George's death. The transfers. The chase. The gunshots. When they finished, Chen leaned back in her chair.
"Show me what you have."
Ilara handed over her camera and memory card. Chen scrolled through the images on a secure computer, her expression unreadable. Then she looked up, and for the first time, her professional mask slipped slightly. "This is good work. Dangerous and foolish, but good."
We've had suspicions about that stretch of coast for months. Unusual vessel traffic. Inconsistent customs declarations from the boatyard. But never enough to get a warrant. This changes things. She stood. You're both going to stay here. In protective custody. Hotel room, security detail, the works. Until this is over. You can't go back to Brixham. Not yet. Do you understand? Liam nodded. He understood. He had known from the moment he pried open that floorboard that there was no going back. The only way forward was through. The operation took 3 weeks to plan. The NCA worked with the Coast Guard, Border Force, and Devon and Cornwall police. They watched the boatyard. They tracked Victor's movements. They built a case that would stand up in court, connecting him to the transfers, the mothership, and the network of buyers who received the illegal goods. On the night of the next transfer, they were ready. A surveillance team watched from the cliffs above Black Cliff Cove with night vision equipment. A fast response boat waited just over the horizon. Undercover officers posed as local fishermen in the harbor. When the RIB hit the beach at midnight, when the van arrived to collect the cargo, the trap snapped shut. Liam and Ilara watched from a secure location in Plymouth on a live video feed. They saw the men on the beach scatter. They saw the RIB try to flee, only to be intercepted by the Coast Guard with spotlights and loudspeakers. They saw Victor, for the first time, clearly. He wasn't running. He stood on the beach, hands slowly rising as officers surrounded him. Calm. Cold. Calculating even in defeat. The news reports the next day were everywhere. Massive smuggling ring busted in Devon. Millions in illegal goods seized. 14 arrested in dawn raids. But the details the media didn't have were the ones that mattered most to Liam. Victor's operation had been running for nearly 3 years. Illegal goods, yes. But also industrial waste being dumped at sea to avoid disposal costs. Environmental crimes that Ilara's research had helped expose. And Tom? Victor never admitted to murder. But the evidence gathered by the NCA suggested what Liam already knew. Tom had been killed because he got too close. Because he kept a notebook. Because he was a good man who saw something wrong and tried to stop it. Liam returned to Brixham on a gray Tuesday morning, 3 months after Victor's arrest. The fog was back, wrapping the harbor in its familiar embrace. But everything felt different now. The albatross was still there, rocking gently at its mooring. He had decided not to sell it. He had spent his savings on repairs instead. He stood on the quay, hands in his pockets, watching the gulls circle overhead. A familiar figure approached. Ilara. She had stayed in Brixham too, her research now funded by a grant to study the long-term environmental impact of the illegal dumping. "You okay?" she asked quietly. He nodded. I keep thinking about what he must have felt. That night. Alone out there. Knowing what he knew. Choosing to go anyway. He knew you would come back, Ilara said softly. He knew someone would find the truth. That's why he left the notebook where you would find it. He believed in you, Liam. Liam looked at the boat, at the fresh paint and clean windows. Somewhere in that hall, his father had hidden a secret. But the real secret was the man himself. A simple fisherman who refused to look the other way. Who paid for his integrity with his life, but whose courage ultimately brought down a criminal network.
I'm going to take her out, Liam said.
The albatross. Not for money. Just for him. Maybe do some fishing the way he taught me. Ilara smiled. He would have liked that. He would have been proud.
They stood together in the fog, two people bound by a shared loss and a shared victory, watching the tide rise and fall. The water that had taken Tom's life had also, in the end, given back his truth. And that, Liam thought, was a kind of justice. The trial took place 6 months later at the Crown Court in Exeter. Victor and his associates were convicted on multiple charges, including conspiracy to smuggle, money laundering, environmental crimes, and, in Victor's case, the murder of Tom Harris. The evidence was overwhelming: Tom's notebook, the photographs Ilara had taken, the testimony of witnesses who finally felt safe enough to speak, and the forensic analysis of the chemical residue found on the albatross. Liam sat in the public gallery on the last day, watching Victor being led away in handcuffs. Their eyes met for just a moment as Victor passed. Victor's expression was blank, empty. But Liam saw something else beneath the surface. Defeat. The cold, calculating man had finally met something he couldn't control or corrupt. The truth. Afterward, Liam walked out into weak winter sunlight. Ilara was waiting for him on the steps of the courthouse, along with Detective Inspector Chen and several officers who had worked the case. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Some things were beyond words. He went back to Brixham that evening. The albatross was waiting, ready. He had spent months learning every bolt, every plank, every rope. It was his now. But it would always be his father's too. As the sun set over the harbor, painting the water in shades of gold and red, Liam cast off the mooring lines and took the boat out for the first time as its owner. He navigated slowly, carefully, past the harbor mouth and into the open sea. The water that had taken his father's life now held his boat steady. He cut the engine and let the albatross drift. The silence was no longer heavy with grief. It was peaceful. He looked out at the horizon, at the endless expanse of gray water meeting pale sky, and for the first time in years, he felt at home. "Thanks, Dad," he whispered to the wind. "I'll take it from here." The tide carried him slowly, gently, toward the open sea. And Liam let it.